Warhawk Beyond 2040, and welcome to a very special edition of the Progressive Rock and Metal album review series. And today I'm going to be taking a look at the short and impressive catalogue from one of the most legendary and iconic supergroups of all time in the progressive rock genre. And even though this band weren't together for that long, in their short existence, they made a huge impression on fans and audiences worldwide. And this band were pretty much formed from the ashes of King Crimson, and they came out at the tail end of the 70s. And it's a band that still gets talked about a lot to this day. And they made some incredible music that was the perfect combination of both progressive rock and jazz fusion. And this is a band that, quite frankly, in my opinion, needs no introduction whatsoever. I'm talking about, of course, the one and only legendary progressive rock band UK. And this is part one of a two-part special where I'm going to be discussing all of UK's entire catalogue of albums. So for part one, we are going to be discussing all of UK's studio albums, and for part two, we are going to be discussing all of UK's official live albums. So, as I mentioned already, UK was more or less formed from the ashes of King Crimson, and the seeds for the formation of UK can be traced all the way back to King Crimson back in 1974, when Robert Fripp very abruptly announced without warning that he was withdrawing himself from King Crimson, and more or less said that the world was coming to an end in 1981. So stupid. But anyway, that's another story for another time. And this left only John Wetton and Bill Bruford. So King Crimson, for all intents and purposes, as far as Robert Fripp was concerned, had ceased to exist. So Bill Bruford would go off to play with Genesis as a touring member and form his own band called Bruford, where he would work with a musician who would really play an important role and help shape the overall sound of the band. And he was an unknown commodity at the time this band came together. And that is, of course, the one and only guitarist Alan Holdsworth. John Wetton would go off to play with Uriah Heep and with Roxy Music as a touring member, where he would also meet a musician who really, in my opinion, helped form UK, and that was keyboardist and violinist Eddie Jobson. And around the time of King Crimson's implosion, both John Wetton and Bill Bruford felt that King Crimson ended far too early, and they felt that they still wanted to continue that style of music. And there were numerous attempts to try and get the ball rolling. There was a trio comprised of John Wetton, Bill Bruford, and Rick Wakeman, which was called British Legion. But unfortunately, nothing came out of that. Rick Wakeman would be pulled from the project as management felt that Rick Wakeman was too big of a star to be lowered in playing with the slightly soiled and used rhythm section of King Crimson. So that band collapsed. And Eddie Jobson had history with King Crimson. He was brought in to provide keyboard and violin overdubs for King Crimson's legendary live album USA. And this led to Eddie Jobson, John Wetton, and Bill Bruford coming together. And this was more or less going to be a new King Crimson lineup with Eddie Jobson. And John Wetton and Bill Bruford were very keen to have Robert Fripp back on board. Robert Fripp showed interest and said that I'll only join if it's not a King Crimson lineup. And from what I have heard, that this was going to be called the League of Crafty Gentlemen. And Robert Fripp would pretty much be on the fence for months on end until finally turning around and deciding he was going to withdraw himself from the project altogether and chose to tour with former Genesis singer Peter Gabriel. So this left the band without a guitarist, and Bill Bruford, who was working with Alan Holdsworth in his band Bruford, brought him to the fold, and that led to the birth of UK. We've got Eddie Jobson on keyboards and violin, John Wetton on bass and vocals, Bill Bruford on drums, and Alan Holdsworth on guitar. The best of the best, a true supergroup, in my opinion. And between these four iconic musicians, they have seen it all, done it all, and played and collaborated with everyone. Eddie Jobson has played with Curved Air, Roxy Music, and Frank Zappa. John Wetton has played with Uriah Heep, Family, Roxy Music, and King Crimson. Bill Bruford has played with Yes, King Crimson, Genesis, and has led his own band, Bruford. And Alan Holdsworth has played with Soft Machine, Tony Williams' Lifetime, Jean-Luc Ponty, Gong, and many other great bands and artists. And this was, as I mentioned already, a true supergroup. No weak links whatsoever. But unfortunately, like with all supergroups, this was not meant to last, as the first incarnation of UK would break up following the band's first tour due to Alan Holdsworth not feeling happy and comfortable playing the same solos every night. And of course, a lot of audiences not getting along with Holdsworth's very unique and jaw dropping guitar playing. And this would lead to both Alan Holdsworth and Bill Bruford leaving UK, leaving Eddie Jobson and John Wetton as the band's remaining members. And this would lead to UK evolving into a trio with the addition of drummer Terry Bozzio, Eddie Jobson's bandmate from Frank Zappa, and this would also be a short lived lineup as well, as UK would eventually dissolve at the beginning of the 80s. And in their short existence, UK puts out two excellent studio albums. So, for today's special edition, which is part one of a two-part special, I am going to be discussing all of UK's studio albums, which is a total of two recordings. And as always, I am going to be talking about each album individually, and I'll be choosing which one I think is the best one. This is tough because there's only two albums, and the two albums from UK are both excellent, both different, but equally as brilliant as the other. And it's really hard because I like both of them, but for different reasons. And in all honesty, there's no bad album between these two. They're both great. I wouldn't like to say one's better than the other. It really comes down to your preference. And you can't go wrong with either of these albums. They're both excellent, well produced, everything about them. They're both masterpieces. I've got nothing bad to say about these two albums. Any of these two albums could be a number one or an all time favourite, depending on how you feel in that moment. But I love them both, and it's a shame we've only got two albums, but what a two we've got here. So we're going to start with the first album, and this one came out in 1978, and it's self-titled, and this one is called UK. So this is the first and sadly only album to feature the original UK lineup comprised of Eddie Jobson, John Wetton, Bill Bruford, and Alan Holdsworth. And I can tell you now, this doesn't disappoint. This is excellent. Top to bottom, start to finish, this is a masterpiece. And all due respect to Robert Fripp, a fine guitar player in his own right, I'm so glad he's not on this album. Alan Holdsworth absolutely rips it up, and he proved to be such a better fit. He really did. And I'm not taking anything away from Robert Fripp. If Robert Fripp was on this album, it would have sounded great. You know, the idea of Eddie Jobson and Robert Fripp playing together would have been a very interesting treat, to say the very least. But I'm so glad we've got Alan Holdsworth for this one. And, you know, I'm not taking anything away from Fripp, but Alan Holdsworth, he's just on another level as far as guitar playing is concerned. Fripp is Fripp. Fripp does what he does as good as anyone you'll ever hear or see. But Holdsworth, he's just godlike. He really is. And the music at its core is progressive rock, but there's also lots of jazz fusion influences. And as I said, this is a masterpiece. No duff tracks whatsoever, and so many great songs to choose from. All four musicians are on top form. They really bring their A game. The production is excellent. The musicianship is top notch. The playing, everything about it is just remarkable. This is a remarkably strong album. So we've got 8 tracks, and most of the compositions are written and composed by Eddie Jobson and John Wetton, who pretty much made up the band's main songwriting team. As I mentioned already, they pretty much co-composed all of the music. There are a couple of co-composition contributions from both Holdsworth and Bruford, but the bulk of the material is predominantly written and composed by Jobson and Wetton. So we kick off this album with the 3-part epic suite In the Dead of Night. For my money, probably the greatest UK song ever written. And it's made up of 3 parts. So we got In the Dead of Night, which is just a badass opener with one of the greatest Holdsworth guitar solos you will ever hear. By the Light of Day, which is absolutely haunting and gorgeous with lots of beautiful violin and keyboard work from Eddie Jobson. And this goes straight into Presto Vivace and Reprise with some great drum work from Bill Bruford. It's just excellent. And then we got 30 Years, which apparently was a track left off from the Rick Wakeman sessions with Wetton and Bruford. Absolutely beautiful, especially opening with Holter playing some very delicate and amazing acoustic guitar playing, and he really rips it up on this track. And then we got the massive and bombastic Alaska, which quite frankly would make Keith Emerson very proud. Absolutely jaw-droppingly epic. Eddie Jobson is king of this track, playing on the CS80 synthesizer. It's dark, it's chilling, it's cold. It really feels like you're in Alaska, no pun intended. It's got such a cold feel to it. It's just absolutely mind-blowingly brilliant. Then we go straight into Time to Kill, which has got some burning Holdsworth guitar work and some scorching violin work from Jobson. And then we go into Nevermore, which has got some unbelievable acoustic guitar playing from Holdsworth, which he also co-composed. Absolutely amazing. The ending with that guitar solo from Holdsworth, it's just unbelievable. And then we got the closer, Mental Medication, which was co-composed with Bill Bruford. Absolutely brilliant, and a great blend of all four musicians' styles all rolled into one. Just absolutely amazing. And the standout tracks for me are, of course, the In the Dead of Night Suite, 30 Years, and Nevermore, and Alaska. But the whole album, from top to bottom, is just a prog rock masterpiece. Sadly, this was the only album to feature Holtooth and Bruford, as they would leave shortly after the band's first tour. But what an album we got! Truly magic between these four musicians. They really captured lightning in a bottle. So there you have it, UK's self-titled album. Quite frankly, a true prog rock masterpiece. Absolutely love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1979, and this one is called Danger Money. So Holdsworth and Bruford are both gone. So UK are now a trio with the addition of Jobson's bandmates from Frank Zappa, drummer Terry Bozzio. And it's a different album to the first UK album. The first UK album was progressive rock, but much more rooted in jazz fusion. Danger Money, on the other hand, is the complete opposite. This is very much a prog rock album, and you could kind of call this, at least I would anyway, ELP on steroids. So after ELP was pretty much done, this lineup of UK pretty much picked up where ELP left off and produced a fantastic album. And the power trio of Jobson, Wetton, and Bozzio, very impressive in my opinion. And it's funny because this album doesn't feature guitar, but there's still so much going on to get your teeth into. And Eddie Jobson, with his violin playing, does an outstanding job filling in lots of different spots and parts and soloing where a guitar player would be. John Wetton, vocally and musically, he sounds as good as I've ever heard him. He sounded great on the first UK album, don't get me wrong, but I think he really comes into his own on Danger Money, in my opinion. And Terry Bozzio, a powerhouse of a drummer. Bill Bruford was a lot more laid back, still a great drummer in his own right, but with Terry Bozzio, he really helps beef up the music and injects a lot of muscle into the sound of UK, and he's just a monster drummer. Bruford and Bozzio, I wouldn't like to say who is the better UK drummer. They're both great, but you can't go wrong with either of them. So we've got 6 tracks, all written and composed by Jobson and Wetton. Now, a couple of these songs, the original UK lineup actually played live, but they never actually recorded it in the studio. So we're getting to hear those songs on this album, but they are played by the trio incarnation of UK. And top to bottom, much like the first UK album, every song on here is excellent. No bad tracks whatsoever. And it just packs a punch from the word go. So we got the title track, Danger Money, which really lets you know loud and clear that this is a different UK to the one you heard on the previous album. It's huge, it's bombastic, it packs a punch, and it's just dynamite stuff. It really is. Jobson is on top form on keyboards. Beautiful vocal harmonies from all three members. John Wetton is just on fire on the bass, and he is on top vocal form as well. Everything about Danger Money is just excellent. And then we've got Rendezvous 602, one of the greatest UK songs ever, with one of the most epic Jobson keyboard solos you will ever hear. Just absolutely amazing. And then we got The Only Thing She Needs, which has got some badass heavy drum work from Terry Bozzio. He just absolutely kicks ass. And that's followed up with a great violin solo from Jobson. Absolutely amazing. And then we've got Caesar's Palace Blues with Jobson in full-on shredder mode on the electric violin. Absolutely incredible song. And then we've got Nothing to Lose, which some people say is kind of like the precursor to what Asia was going to be, which would come just a couple of years after this album. It's a really good song. It's catchy. It's got some great AOR and pop hooks and some great melodies as well, and some unbelievable harmonies. Some of that style of harmony work would become a trademark for Asia, but a great song nonetheless. I believe it was a hit single somewhere in Holland and Japan. And once again, another great violin solo from Jobson. And then we've got the 12-minute epic Carrying No Cross. What a way to close out the album. Instrumentally, as good as anything ELP ever put out in their existence. Just absolutely powerful with a great piano solo from Jobson, which Keith Emerson would be very proud of. Just a great showcase for all three members, and probably the best song this lineup ever made. It's just outstanding, really is. It's just 12 minutes of prog epicness. Doesn't get any better than Carrying No Cross. Just absolutely gorgeous. It's predominantly an instrumental, but still absolutely amazing. Love Bozio's drum work, love Jobson's keyboard work, Wetton's bass work. Everything about that track is just off the charts. It's just excellent. And the standout tracks for me are the title track Danger Money, Rendezvous 602, The Only Thing She Needs, and Carrying No Cross. But there's no bad song on this album, none whatsoever. Just an absolute masterpiece and a worthy successor to the UK self-titled album. Like I said, UK, the first album, much more rooted in jazz fusion, but still very much a prog rock album. Danger Money is full-on prog rock, 100%, without question. Can't go wrong with either of them, in my opinion. Both outstanding albums. So there you have it. Danger Money, excellent album, and sadly, the final album from UK as the band would disband in 1980. But holy cow, excellent stuff. Would have loved another album from this lineup, but what can you do? Some things are just not meant to last, but what we did get, tremendous stuff. So there you have it. Danger Money, absolutely epic. So, which UK album do I think is the best one? Well, like I said at the beginning, we've only got two to choose from. They're both great, both different, and I love both of them equally. And as I said earlier, you can't go wrong with either of these albums. They're both excellent. Any of these two albums could be a number one or an all time favourite. They're so good. But if I had to choose which is the better of the two, in my honest opinion, I'm going with the first album for one reason: Alan Holdsworth. You know, Alan Holdsworth has such a massive presence on this album. His guitar playing is just off the charts, and you know, he really comes into his own on this album. And everybody, John Wetton, Eddie Jobson, and Bill Bruford, and Alan Holdsworth especially, all on top form. So many great songs, start to finish. It's just excellent. Not a bad song whatsoever. I do love Danger Money just as much, but I tend to go more towards the first album just a bit more. It's just so damn good, and it truly was capturing lightning in a bottle. Would I have liked to have seen another album from this lineup? Absolutely, 100%, but it wasn't meant to be. But what we did get was remarkable. And it's a shame, really, because what makes this album more special is two of the four members of this band are sadly no longer with us, and that's John Wetton and Alan Holdsworth. But wow, they really left a lasting impression with this album. Absolutely love this one. It's such a classic, in my opinion. So there you have it. UK, the self titled album. for my money, the best UK album of the two. Danger Money's great. I love it, but I do like the first one just a little bit more. So there you have it. UK, the self-titled album. Excellent album, in my opinion, and one of the greatest albums ever in the progressive rock genre, in my opinion. Love it so much. So that's going to be it from me. I am going to wrap this up now. What's your favourite UK album? Is it the self-titled or Danger Money? There's no right or wrong answer. We all have our favourite albums. You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Progressive Rock and Metal album review series, where I will return with part two of this two-part special, where I am going to be discussing UK's official live albums. So make sure you don't miss that. So until next time, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.